In front of me is probably the most important camera that Fujifilm has launched in recent years. This is the X-S10. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions, and today we will have an initial look at this camera here. This is the X-S10, and just note this is a production sample loaned to me by Fujifilm Singapore. I would like to thank them for loaning me this copy for the review itself. And it is a production sample, so what you see here, what I say, and what you see in the box later is exactly what you get in a retail set. Before I start, let's look at what's inside the box, because I did a short unboxing video, and already you can from the box itself see what are the available ports and how this X-S10 will work. Now, when you open the box up, you will see a manual, and you just put it aside, and underneath it is the camera itself wrapped in plastic and held with a carton box. Removing the camera and then removing the carton box, you will see underneath it is another box that holds all the accessories. Taking open the accessory box, you will see that there is a battery, and this battery is the same battery used in the X-T4. So if you are using an X-T4, worry not, this camera will use the exact same battery itself. And then if you look at all the other accessories, notice one thing. The charger is missing, and without the charger, it means that this camera have to be charged with USB-C, and therefore charging the battery internally in the camera itself. Now, I have tested that, it works, and it also allows you to power the camera through USB-C. And if you look further in the accessory themselves, you'll notice that there is a USB-C to a headphone jack. And that is to say that this camera has no headphone jack, and if you want to do monitoring of audio, you have to plug the USB-C in, which also means that you can't power the camera while monitoring, and that's something to note. And if you want that function, you have to upgrade to the X-T4. Other than that, there is nothing special. The other one is the USB-C and the strap, and that's about it for the box opening. Now, going back to the camera itself, now the X-S10 is literally a X-T4 in a smaller body, and I'm saying that this body is truly very small because I don't have X-T4 here, but look at it compared to my R5, and you can really tell that the X-S10 is so much smaller than the R5 itself. And the X-T3 and X-T4s are not really that small of a camera. They are almost the same size as, I believe, an A7, but this is definitely way smaller, and I can easily hold the hand. I can tell you that's the fact. Now, not only is it smaller, it is also very light. This camera weighs less than 500 grams. I believe its full weight with the battery and the SD card inside is only 460 plus grams, making it one of the lightest camera you can ever get in the market. Now, being light doesn't mean that it gives up ergonomics, because the grip itself is very good, very deep, very nice. In fact, I did a photo shoot with this, and I can tell you that this is way, way better than the X-T30, X-T20. Those cameras are small and light, but their grip are so flimsy. While this camera is small, it's light, but it has a fantastic grip for its size. The only problem, of course, is that even with my small, mid-sized hand, I still have a dangling finger. So if you have a very big hand, you probably even have two fingers dangling out. So that is something to note with the X-S10 itself. However, the grip is really, really deep and really nice. I can tell you that you can easily hold a 90mm with this on one hand. Don't feel any problem, and I can even bet to you that if this mount and chassis can hold it, you can even probably hold a 200mm like this. I don't think that will be a problem itself. So other than the nice grip, there's nothing much to talk about in terms of general size. It is a very small, very light camera itself. And if you look from the side itself, there is a USB-C, a micro HDMI, and of course a mic jack, and that's about it in terms of ports. This camera really doesn't have much ports to talk about. And in terms of the door itself, there is only one door, and this door houses both the battery and the SD card. So that is something to note. To change the SD card, you must open the battery door and then use your finger and dig it in and then press the SD card out as such. Okay, so that is something to really note when you are using the X-S10. So that is about it when it comes to actually the body itself. So now let's take a more in-depth look in terms of its buttons and its functionalities. If you ask me, the buttons are its biggest departure from the standard X-T series. The X-S10 doesn't have the standard ISO dial, exposure compensation dial, and of course the shutter dial. What comes with it now is something you can relate more if you use modern cameras. A mode dial with 4 custom functions, and then 3 unmarked dials, left, right, and front. And then a few buttons here and there. The Q button has been moved to the top, and then there is of course the ISO button. When you press it, you can actually change ISO at the top itself. The on-off switch is now at the top, and the record button is also now at the top. Now, if you look at the back itself, there is of course a few buttons: the play, the camera buttons, the AEL, the AF lock, and then the menu button at the bottom here. The most important part is that they still managed to give you a joystick, which is really important if you ask me. The joystick is a must for such a camera to choose AF points. Other than that, notice one thing: there is no custom button. There is really no space to put any custom button. And really, that is something that you must note. Now, the X-S10 comes with a flash where you can push a lever to the side and it pops up. So this is very useful if you are traveling and you need such an item itself. There's one more thing I want to talk about is that the LCD and the EVF. Now, the LCD and EVF in terms of resolution is lower than the X-T4. This is, I believe, 2 million pixels and this is 1 million pixels. So they are lower than normal. However, at least Fujifilm still managed to give you a swivel screen. And this swivel screen, if you ask me, is very important because firstly, it allows you to finally do a portrait shot without touching the ground. That is something not doable by the last series of small camera, the X-T30. Of course, the X-T4 can do it. The X-T3 can somewhat do it with a portrait lift. But having a fully articulated screen is definitely useful for such things. And the people who will benefit the most are vloggers because they can now selfie with this camera, and this camera is very, very light. Unlike the X-T4, which is a few hundred grams heavier, this is totally lightweight. Now, of course, the articulated screen is open for debate whether you love it or not. In fact, if you ask me as a stills photographer, I would prefer the flip up and flip side screens rather than the whole articulated screen because trying to open this just to shoot a portrait shoot at times can be a little bit irritating, but I kind of got used to it when I used the R5. So pretty much no complaint, and I think it's a personal preference itself. Now, one of the things that you will note that the eye relief of this particular eyepiece is not much. So really, your nose will probably touch the screen quite often, and that is the nature of being a very, very small camera. Also, the other thing is that there is not much, if any at all, there's no like rubber or anything at the eyepiece. So it can be a bit uncomfortable to some people. And that, I think this is a very small, light, and really tiny little camera that is very useful in the field itself. And really, if you want to talk about the size, just imagine this is a full frame 135 f1.8. It's very heavy. It's not light. It's like 1.1 kg. And this is the X-S10 with a 90mm. The total size and weight is so close to a full frame 135 f2. Of course, you lose a bit of bokeh, but when it comes to doing the job, this setup will definitely get the job done. So one of the more important things to talk about the X-S10 is of course the in-body image stabilization, because Fujifilm has finally shrunk it down. They first started with the X-H1, then the GFX, then the X-T4, and finally it has shrunk to the size of the X-S10. And that's important because Sony till today, yes, they have image stabilization, but the APS-C version is also not much smaller than this camera. The smaller Sony cameras do not have in-body image stabilization. So at least Fujifilm, when it comes to in-body image stabilization, is the same as the rest of the market at the minimum now. And that is important because Fujifilm prime lenses do not have any form of stabilization normally. Most of their telephotos and of course their zooms, some of them have image stabilization, but a lot of the prime lens doesn't have it, like this 90mm f2 here. And this body now gives a lot of advantage to those prime lens because this kind of body, this kind of size is really meant to be taken out and do street shoots, night shoots, traveling shoots with this particular camera. So how good is the IS? Now the IS together with the 90mm f2 gives me 100% hit rate at 120, 80% hit rate at 110, and at 1.5, sadly, I couldn't get a single sharp shots where I tried 5 shots in a row. Now, if you compare to something like the Canon R5, wise in terms of IBIS, the X-S10 is very similar. So the R5 gives like 110 with 70 to 80% hit rate, and the X-S10 gives slightly better where you mount the equivalent 135mm. However, at 1.5, the R5 I think is a bit more aggressive, and as such, you still can get 20-30% hit rate. While with the X-S10, I couldn't get any sharp shots with that 5 shots in a row. In fact, the sharpest shot is still quite blur, if you ask me. So overall, the IBIS system in this camera is quite respectable. 90mm held at 110 is very, very good. Now, for the purpose of portrait, you will never do it at that speed. At portrait, you probably use it at 150. So, this camera finally is very, very useful because you can now portrait in lower lights. with prime lenses, and that is very important. Moving on to image quality, I will not touch on it in this particular review itself because even though I did a shoot with Mickey, however, I made a mistake. I didn't actually activate RAW. Luckily, the shots are still pretty nice, and you can see here the shots are pretty okay. And I actually also did some comparison shot with this camera and the R5, the 135, and really, if I didn't really zoom in to 100%, just outright, if you compare, the only difference you will see is the bokeh. Look at the background really closely, and you will see that one of them is a more shallow depth of field, and the other one is just more details at the back, and that's about it. When I do compare the shots themselves, unless I'm blowing it up to 100%, I really can't tell much of a difference between both cameras. So just to note that if you are just a normal prosumer or amateurish photographer, this camera is probably very, very good for you. And that brings out to my final thoughts on the X-S10. Who's the X-S10 for? I'm pretty sure the X-S10 is for every other user who's wanting to enter the X system, but do not need the shutter dial and the ISO dial. Now, if you're not going for the nostalgic way of controlling the camera, the X-S10 is the perfect camera for you if you do not mind an APS-C body and you want to buy into the Fujifilm X series cameras. And the X-S10, if you ask me, really is a very, very important camera because it represents what an APS-C mirrorless could do. It is small, it is light, it is compact, it comes with a fully articulated screen, and it even comes with IBIS finally in such a small body. This makes any of those very light f2 lenses a really perfect combination for this setup. In fact, I'm going to try to get some f2 lens to really show you the 35, 23 and 50 f2 on this camera. Those lenses are really made for this camera because they are so small, so light, so compact. And with this camera, they are the perfect camera if you want to do a little bit of portraiture, a little bit of travel, a little bit of street. Those f2 lenses with this camera is a blast to use. They'll be so small, so light, and so easy to handle. Overall, the X-S10 really is, to me, the most important camera that Fujifilm has launched because it pretty much, fulfills everything you need. It has the same innards as the X-T4, giving you very good image quality, very good experience. However, it comes in such a small package that, other than the lack of dual cut slot and the full weather sealing and a little bit of quirks in the exterior and of course lack of customization buttons, the X-S10 pretty much can do everything you need as a camera itself, and you will not have any complaints using this camera. It is fast, good, and really gets the job done in a very small, light, and compact body. And not only that, there's one last thing I want to talk about, and it's the price. This camera is affordable. It is only about $1,000 USD. In Singapore, the price is not out yet, but I'm guessing it's about 1.4 to 1.5k Sing dollars, making this one of the more affordable X series camera, yet having full function as the X-T4. Even the IBIS is inside. So I really can't see a reason of not buying this camera unless you are a pro. You are using the camera to make money, and as such, you will need things like weather sealing, you'll need things such as dual cut slots, but if not, this camera will fulfill most of your photography needs. And that's about it for today's review. I really want to bring this review really quick because I think this camera is relatively exciting to use, and pretty much, if you ask me, very important camera to the X series. And if you have not pre-ordered it or intending to pre-order it soon, I really recommend you to get it because unless you are a sucker for the ISO dials and the shutter dial, the X-S10 will do everything an X-T4 can do, just in a smaller package, perfect body for general usage itself. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.